The new assistant sent me a wedding invitation, announcing she was marrying the CEO. I calmly picked up my phone and called my husband. "Are you getting married?" I still remember that afternoon so clearly, the kind of afternoon that even now makes my heart skip a beat. Not from pain anymore, but because it was the first cut, the one that started a chain of events that completely changed my life. My week-long business trip to San Diego had just ended. I dragged my travel-worn suitcase across the polished floors of the New York office, the wheels clattering softly as I walked into the familiar marketing department. Everything was the same: the desks, the rhythmic tapping of keyboards, the steady hum of the air conditioning. The only thing different was the way people looked at me. No one said anything, but their quick glances followed by an immediate turn of their heads were unnerving. The way they whispered, just soft enough, but still within earshot, made me feel like something was wrong. Before I could figure it out, a cloud of strong perfume enveloped me. "You're back." The voice was so sweet it sounded artificial. I looked up. In front of me was a young woman with a high ponytail wearing a tailored designer suit that hugged her body, her stilettos tapping a steady, confident rhythm on the floor, as if she were walking on a stage. Her name was Mia, the CEO's new assistant. She had joined the company 2 months ago, right before I left for my first business trip. The rumor was she'd studied abroad, came from a wealthy family, and had caught the boss's eye from day one. I'd never paid it any mind until that moment. Mia smiled, her eyes scanning me from head to toe, not bothering to hide her assessment or a hint of pity. Then she placed a crimson invitation on my desk. It was made of thick, cream-colored cardstock with gold foil embossing, the kind you knew was expensive just by looking at it. "You must be tired from your trip," Mia said, her voice still dripping with that cloying sweetness. "Make sure you come. The CEO and I are getting married next month." I didn't miss a beat. Every word landed with a chilling clarity. I looked down at the invitation, my fingers touching the cold paper. It felt like ice was shooting straight into my bones. The groom's name was embossed in elegant script, Ethan. The bride's name, Mia. I didn't need to read any further because Ethan was my husband. We had been married for 3 years, a marriage no one knew about. No wedding, no announcement, no photos, just a marriage certificate and a contract. 3 years ago, I needed money to save my father's company. Ethan needed a convenience marriage to appease his family. We agreed to a 3-year term, no interference in each other's private lives. After 3 years, we would go our separate ways. I thought he would at least uphold that basic principle, but I was wrong. In the 1 week I was out of the office, he not only found another woman, but was publicly marrying her, announcing it to the entire company, and even sending an invitation to me, his legal wife. I gripped the invitation, my fingers trembling, but I maintained a calm expression. I looked up at Mia, a slight curve forming on my lips. "Congratulations." Just one word, light as air, but it was enough to make her pause. Then she smiled, a radiant smile, as if she had just won a major victory. "I knew you'd be happy for us," Mia said. "When it's meant to be, you can't stop it. Ethan said he likes women like me, young and interesting. Not the—" She paused, her eyes flicking down to my still rumpled travel clothes. "Boring type." I said nothing, just held her gaze long enough to make her look away first. Mia turned and walked off, leaving the thick scent of her perfume lingering in the air. The office was still silent, but I knew they were all waiting for my reaction. A breakdown, a burst of anger, a dramatic scene. But no. I sat down, placed the invitation neatly on my desk, and dialed a familiar number. It rang 3 times before he answered. "You're back." Ethan's voice was as deep and steady as ever. "I need that report by tomorrow morning." Not a word of explanation, not a hint of guilt, as if the wedding was the most natural thing in the world. I was silent for a second. Then I asked, my voice so soft it felt foreign even to me, "Are you getting married?" The line went silent. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then he said yes. Just one word, terse cold, without explanation, without preamble, without any regard for the fact that the person asking was his wife. I let out a short, hollow laugh. "I see." I hung up. I didn't wait for more. I didn't ask for more. I didn't need to. At that point, everything was painfully clear. I sat there for 10 minutes staring at the wedding invitation, motionless. The AC was still humming, but I felt a chill spreading from within, a draft seeping into my very bones. The whispers around me started to grow louder. I thought the CEO was single. Mia's only been here 2 months and she's already marrying him. Hannah must be in shock. She's over 30, still single in everyone's eyes. And now this. I heard every word, but I didn't react. Only one thing was slowly changing inside me. It wasn't pain. It wasn't jealousy. It was coldness. A very clear, very sober coldness. I picked up the invitation, looked at it one last time, and then tore it into pieces slowly and evenly. The paper fluttered into the trash can like dust. But I knew this wasn't over. It was just the beginning. That night, I didn't go back to our shared apartment, a place that had never truly felt like home in 3 years. I checked into a hotel near the office, took a long hot shower, and sat by the window looking down at the city. The lights, the traffic, everything was normal. Only my life had just taken a sharp, unexpected turn. I picked up my phone and made the first call. I need you to run a full check on all my financial accounts. The second call. I need to activate the contingency plan. The third call. Do you still remember the 3-year contract? We might need to use it sooner than planned. I put the phone down, took a deep breath, and opened my laptop. I logged into a locked folder I hadn't thought I'd ever need to open. Inside was everything. Everything I had quietly prepared. I wasn't a paranoid person, but I grew up in a family that had gone bankrupt once. I understood one thing. Trusting people is a luxury. The screen lit up. Files appeared one by one, photos, audio recordings, documents, and one folder named Mia. I stared at it for a long time, then I clicked. The light from the screen illuminated my face. There was no more exhaustion, no more hurt. There was only one thing left: clarity. Ethan, Mia, you want a grand wedding? Fine, I'll be there. And I promise it will be a day neither of you will ever forget. I barely slept that night, not because of the pain, but because my mind was too clear. So clear that every little detail from the past 3 years began to surface, as if someone were playing my life back in slow motion, forcing me to see everything I had previously chosen to ignore. I sat propped against the headboard, my laptop on my lap, the blue light of the screen casting shadows on my face. The folder labeled Mia was still open. It didn't contain much, but it was enough: a resume, a few credit card statements, a contact list, and some unverified audio clips. I opened the resume first. Mia, 25, studied abroad, graduated from a prestigious university work experience at a major firm. Perfect. Too perfect. It was suspicious. I wasn't naturally distrustful, but after years in marketing, I knew one thing: anything that looks too good on paper has usually been edited. I scrolled down to her university. The name sounded impressive, but I'd seen it somewhere before, not on a list of top schools, but in an article about diploma mills. I paused, not jumping to conclusions, just saving the thought and moving on. Next, the credit card statements. The numbers leaped out at me: designer bags, jewelry, fine dining, vacations. She was spending more in a month than an assistant's annual salary. I frowned. If Ethan was giving her the money, it made sense. But if he wasn't, where was it coming from? Before I could think further, my phone buzzed. It was Leo, my most trusted colleague from the IT department. The kid wasn't great with people, but his computer skills were terrifyingly good. "Hannah, you're back." His voice was as usual, a bit blunt but genuine. "Yeah," I said. "I heard what happened," he said. I was silent, and so was he. After a moment, Leo continued, "Do you need anything?" Just that one question. He didn't ask who was right or wrong. He wasn't curious about the drama. He just asked what I needed. I looked out the window. The city was still bright, but for the first time I felt like I had an anchor. "Leo." "Yeah, help me run a background check on someone." He didn't ask why. He only asked one thing. "Do you have any info to start with?" "I'll send it over." After hanging up, I sent the entire Mia folder to Leo. No explanation needed. Some people you don't need to say much to. They just get it. With that done, I shut my laptop, but my mind refused to rest. I remembered the early days of my marriage to Ethan. No love, no romance, just a clear-cut contract. He told me from the start, "This is just a partnership." I nodded because at the time I had no right to ask for more. My father's company was on the brink of collapse, the debt like a mountain crushing my family. Ethan appeared and offered a deal, a 3-year marriage, in exchange for him settling the debt. I agreed without hesitation because I had no other choice. For 3 years, we lived like strangers. We only returned to the apartment together on weekends when we had to appear before his family. Otherwise, we lived separate lives. I worked. He worked. I occasionally heard rumors about him with other women, but I didn't care. Not because I was noble, but because I knew my place, a wife on paper, nothing more. Even so, I thought he would honor the agreement at least until the contract ended. There were only 2 months left. Just 2 months. But he couldn't wait. He didn't just betray me, he publicly humiliated me. The thought made me laugh, a soft, cold laugh. Just then my phone buzzed again. A text from Ethan. "Come home tonight." I looked at the message, then turned off the screen without replying. There was no need. For 3 years I had always been cooperative, always played my part. But from today, that obligation was over. The next morning I arrived at the office earlier than usual, so early that most of the lights on our floor weren't even on. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and started working on the report. Everything proceeded like a normal day, but inside, I was anything but normal. Around noon, Leo called. "Hannah?" "Yeah. There's a problem." I wasn't surprised. "What is it?" "Mia's degree is fake." I closed my eyes for a second. No surprise, just confirmation. "What else?" "Her credit card has a suspicious source of funds, several large transfers from intermediary accounts withdrawn almost immediately." I tightened my grip on the phone. "Keep going." Leo was quiet for a moment, then said, "There's one more thing. I think you should hear this." A file was sent over. I opened it. The audio was a little distorted, but clear enough. It was Mia's voice, sweet, but laced with irritation. "How much longer are you going to keep that woman around?" My heart stopped. Then Ethan's cold voice replied, "Until the contract is up." Mia laughed. "I don't like seeing her in the office," Ethan replied. "Just ignore her." A pause, then Mia said, "Or we could just get married early. Let her know her place." I clutched the phone, my knuckles turning white, and then Ethan's voice, crystal clear. "Fine. Just one word, but it was enough for me to understand that this wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was planned, a wedding designed not just for marriage, but to push me out publicly, humiliatingly. I closed the file without listening further. I didn't need to. I understood. I understood perfectly. I stood up and went to the restroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was the same. No tears, no weakness. Only my eyes were different. I remembered my father's words. "Hannah, sometimes you have to lose a battle to win the war. But sometimes if you don't stand up, people will walk all over you for the rest of your life." 3 years ago, I chose to bow my head. Today, I would stand tall. I returned to my desk, sat down, and opened my laptop. I composed an email. The recipient, David Chen, my lawyer, the only one I trusted. Subject: activate contingency plan. I typed each word slowly, clearly, without a single mistake. After sending it, I opened another file, the guest list. The list HR had just sent out for the CEO's wedding preparations. I scrolled through the names, the titles, partners, shareholders, family. I stopped. A small, sharp smile formed on my lips. It wasn't cold anymore. It was sharp. "All right," I whispered. "If you want to make it a big show, I'll help you make it the biggest show of your lives." I closed the laptop and sat up straight. Outside, the sun was climbing higher. A new day. But for me, this was no longer an ordinary day. It was the beginning of a game I had no intention of losing. That morning, after sending the email to my lawyer David, I did nothing for a few minutes. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I needed a moment of silence to confirm one last time that the path I was about to take had no turning back. Once I started, I had to see it through to the end. No hesitation, no mercy, and no room for error. I sat still, hands on the keyboard, my eyes on the screen, but seeing nothing. My father's words from years ago echoed in my mind from the day his company went bankrupt. My family sat in our empty living room, most of our furniture already repossessed. He looked at me for a long time and said something I only now fully understood. "Hannah, there are times you have to accept defeat to preserve your chances. But there are other times when if you don't stand up, you'll spend the rest of your life being stepped on, never able to hold your head high again." 3 years ago, I chose to endure. Now I chose to stand up. My phone vibrated, pulling me back to the present. It was David. I answered. His voice was as calm and measured as always, each word clear and precise. Just like how he handled every case, cool professional with no room for emotion. "I received your email." "Yes." "You're confirming you want to activate the full contingency plan." I didn't answer immediately. I took a deep breath. "Yes, activate everything." The line was silent for a second, as if he was weighing the gravity of my decision. Then he continued, "I have to ask you one last question, Hannah. Are you prepared for this? Because if we go this route, it's not just a divorce. It's an all-out confrontation, legally, professionally, and it could even impact the company's interests. You won't be an outsider anymore." I looked out the window. The sunlight hit my desk so bright it was blinding. I stopped being an outsider the moment he sent me that wedding invitation. David didn't say more, just gave a short, "Understood. From now on, I will handle everything with the goal of maximizing your legal entitlements, but I need your full cooperation. No acting on your own is outside of the plan." "I understand." "One more thing," he added. "The documents you sent, especially the audio recording. If we can verify the source and time, it has significant legal value. But I need the original file, not a processed copy. I'll get it to you as soon as possible." "Good." Hanging up, I set the phone down. The chaos in my heart from the night before was gone, replaced by a clear, straight path, each step laid out before me. It felt like entering a match where I could already see the outcome. But surprisingly, I felt no glee, only a profound sense of calm. By late morning, the office was buzzing. News of Ethan and Mia's wedding had spread faster than I expected. Almost every department was talking about it, some with curiosity, some with admiration, others with a mix of jealousy and gossip. And of course, there were the glances directed at me, the person who seemingly had no role in this story. Walking past the break room, I overheard two accountants whispering. I heard the CEO bought Mia a ring worth hundreds of thousands. "See, that's what happens when a man has money. He can have whoever he wants." Who would choose someone like Hannah? She's always so serious. "Yeah, if I were a guy, I wouldn't be into that either." I paused for a beat, but didn't turn around, didn't react. I just kept walking. This time, there was no sting. It felt distant, like listening to a story about someone else. Back at my desk, just as I sat down, Ethan's executive assistant called. "Hannah, Mr. Hayes would like to see you in his office." "Okay, I'm on my way." I stood up, smoothed my blazer, and glanced at the small mirror on my desk, not to fix my appearance, but to ensure my face showed no emotion. The elevator rose to the top floor. The doors opened to a quiet space, a stark contrast to the noise below. I knocked. "Come in," Ethan's voice. I entered. He was standing by the window, his back to me, tall in a perfectly tailored suit. He looked exactly the same as he did 3 years ago. The only difference was that I was no longer looking at him with the eyes of someone who had accepted a compromise. "Sit," he said without turning around. I sat and waited. After a moment, he finally turned his eyes, sweeping over me, pausing for a second as if in assessment. "You received the invitation." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "I did." "Good." He nodded. "You need to be there." I looked at him. "In what capacity?" His brow furrowed slightly. "As an employee of this company." I laughed a small laugh, but it was enough to shatter the cold silence in the room. "An employee." Ethan did not like my reaction. I could see it in his eyes. "This isn't something to joke about." "I'm not joking," I replied. "I just find it interesting." He was silent for a few seconds, then said, his voice deeper, "Hannah, we had an agreement. You should know your boundaries." Boundaries. That word. If this had happened before, I might have stayed silent, but not today. "I know my boundaries very well," I said slowly. "But are you sure you're still within yours?" The atmosphere in the room shifted. Ethan looked at me longer this time, not assessing but scrutinizing. "What do you mean by that?" "I think you know." I didn't need to elaborate. Some things, when half-spoken, are fully understood. He didn't answer right away, just returned to his desk and picked up a pen, tapping it lightly on the wood surface, a habit of his when he was thinking. "I don't want things to get complicated," he finally said. "The contract ends in 2 months. Just do your part, and I won't treat you unfairly." I looked at the man before me. And what if I don't want to wait 2 months? The pen in his hand stopped tapping. He looked up, his gaze sharper. "Are you threatening me?" I shook my head. "No." I smiled. "I'm reminding you." A long, heavy silence stretched between us. Neither of us backed down. Finally, Ethan was the one to look away. "You can go." His voice was cold again. I stood up and walked to the door. With my hand on the doorknob, I paused. Without turning back, I said, "Ethan." He didn't reply, but I knew he was listening. "You're going to regret this." I opened the door and walked out. The door closed softly behind me, but I knew that from that moment on, there was no going back for us. As I walked toward the elevator, I felt much lighter, as if I had just set down a burden I had been carrying for 3 years. That afternoon, Leo sent another file. This time it was a video. I opened it. The footage was a bit shaky, a private room in a restaurant. Mia and Ethan sat across from each other. I didn't need to hear the sound. Just seeing the way they laughed, the way they touched, was enough to know their relationship had been going on for more than just a few days. I closed the video without finishing it, not because I couldn't bear to watch, but because it was no longer necessary. From now on, this wasn't about feelings. It was a calculation. I opened the wedding guest list again. This time I didn't just look. I started taking notes. Who were the shareholders? Who were family who held influence? Who could become witnesses? I marked each name, analyzed each position. I worked slowly, meticulously, just as I would for my biggest marketing campaigns. The only difference was that this time the campaign was my life. The afternoon passed more slowly than usual. Not because there was less work, but because every moment seemed stretched out as if life itself was giving me extra time to prepare, to get everything in order, before stepping into a phase I knew would be far from simple. I remained at my desk, completing my tasks as usual, editing reports, answering emails, coordinating with partners. Everything followed protocol, not a single step out of place. Anyone looking at me would think I was completely unaffected by the morning's events, that I was the same old Hannah, the cold, steady, unremarkable woman who only knew how to work. But only I knew that every small decision I made that day was no longer just about work. It was preparation. Around 3 p.m., the HR department sent out a preliminary plan for Ethan and Mia's wedding, requesting all department heads to cooperate in creating the best possible image for the company. The wording was beautiful and professional, but it was essentially a notice that everyone was expected to contribute to making this wedding perfect. I opened the file and read it from start to finish, not skipping a single line, the guest list, seating chart, event schedule, timing for each segment, and even a section about a love story video to be played on a large screen. I paused there. My cursor hovered. My eyes scanned the description. A video chronicling the couple's romantic journey, including photos, memories, and well wishes. I let out a small, silent laugh. If it weren't for what I'd heard and seen, I might have believed this was a beautiful love story. But unfortunately, I knew the truth. And because I knew, I was calm. I downloaded the entire file, saved it, renamed it, and moved it into a dedicated folder with everything else I had prepared. Each detail was put in its proper place, like chess pieces waiting to be moved. Just then my phone rang. It was my mom. I stared at her name for a moment before answering. "Hi, Mom." My mother's voice was familiar, but today there was a slight hesitation, as if she was choosing her words carefully. "Hannah, are you busy?" "No, Mom. What's up?" Well, I heard some people talking that there's a big wedding happening at your company soon. Is that right? I was silent for a second. News really did travel fast. Yes, there is. My mom didn't press. She was always like that, letting me speak first. But this time, I said nothing more. Finally, she sighed softly. Does it have anything to do with you? I looked out the window. The afternoon light had softened. It does. I said one quiet word. The other end of the line was silent. I could hear my mom breathing. Then she said slowly, "Are you okay?" If she had asked me that last night, I wouldn't have been able to answer. But now I smiled faintly. I'm okay. And this time, it was true. My mom didn't ask any more questions. She just said, "No matter what happens, remember, you always have a home here." I gripped the phone a little tighter. I know. After hanging up, I sat quietly for a moment. Not because I was emotional, but because I realized something. I was no longer alone. 3 years ago, I walked into this marriage by myself. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I had my family. I had people who believed in me. And most importantly, I had myself. Towards the end of the workday, Leo sent more data. This time, it was more detailed. Hannah. Yeah. Got something else. I opened the file. It was a statement showing multiple significant money transfers between intermediary accounts. The common link was Mia. This money isn't clean, Leo said. Where is it from? Can't trace it all, but there are signs it's connected to a rival company. I frowned. A rival company. If this was true, then this story wasn't just about an affair anymore. It was about corporate interests, maybe even a conspiracy. Leo. Yeah, keep digging. I'm on it. Hanging up, I looked at the data again. The cold numbers hid something much bigger. I suddenly recalled a small detail. 2 weeks ago, a major company project had its information leaked before the official announcement, causing us to lose our advantage in negotiations. At the time, everyone thought it was an oversight. But what if it wasn't? I closed my laptop. A strange feeling rose within me. Not fear, but excitement. A game was slowly revealing its true scale, and I was no longer a passive player. That evening, I didn't go straight back to the hotel. I stopped at a boutique not to shop, but to order a dress. Not a wedding dress, but a long, dark-colored gown with a simple yet sharp design. The sales associate asked me, "Are you wearing this to an event?" I looked at my reflection in the mirror. It was no longer the tired woman from a few days ago, but someone who was ready. "Yes," I replied. "A very important event." I paid the deposit, noted the pickup time, and left. Night fell and the city lit up. I returned to my hotel, sat by the window, and opened my laptop. I reviewed all my documents notes and organized everything one last time, leaving no detail unchecked, because I knew in this game one wrong move and I would lose, and I would not allow that to happen. Around midnight, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "You're taking this too far." I looked at the message. I didn't need to ask who it was from. I didn't reply. I just deleted it and blocked the number. Not because I was scared, but because it wasn't worth my time. I put the phone down, turned off the lights, and lay down. This time I slept soundly. No nightmares, no anxiety, because I knew everything had started moving in the right direction. And this time I was no longer the one being cornered. I was the one slowly backing my opponents into a position from which they could not escape. The following days passed faster than I expected, not because time was actually shorter, but because my every day was packed with tasks to complete, calculations to finalize, and the last few pieces of the puzzle to put in place. It was like a painting where, if even one stroke was missing, the entire composition would be thrown off balance, and I couldn't afford to make a mistake. There would be no second chances. I started showing up in the administration department more often under the perfectly reasonable pretext of helping to prepare for the CEO's wedding. No one could object. In fact, it was seen as an honor, and it was through this that I gained access to nearly all the documents related to the ceremony, from the stage layout and AV equipment list to the minute-by-minute event script. I read memorized and made very small adjustments, so small that no one would notice. Some changes were just the placement of a device. Others were just a reordering of a video sequence. But I knew that when the time came, these small details would make a very big difference. Mia continued to appear every day, growing more radiant each time, like someone steadily climbing to a peak she believed was rightfully hers. The way she looked at me also changed. It was no longer scrutinizing but confident, even a little pitying, as if she had already decided I was just a loser, trying to cling to the last shreds of my dignity. One afternoon, while I was checking the gift list, Mia walked over and placed her hand on my desk, leaning in just close enough for me to smell her familiar perfume. "You're working so hard." I didn't look up. "It's just work. I thought you wouldn't want to be involved." I stopped writing and looked up at her. "Why?" Mia smiled. "Because I thought it would make you uncomfortable." I stared directly into her eyes for a long moment before speaking, my voice so light it was almost devoid of emotion. "You're overthinking it." Mia's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but it was long enough for me to notice. She didn't understand. She didn't understand why I was so calm, why I wasn't reacting. And that was what was starting to make her uneasy. But she quickly masked it, straightening up and patting the desk. "Well, either way, I hope you'll come." "Of course," I replied. And this time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes that wasn't confidence but worry. That evening, I got a text from David. "Phase 1 of the file is complete." I called him immediately. "How is it solid?" he said. "All we need is your signal for when to go public." I looked at the calendar. The wedding was 7 days away. "Not yet. I want to wait." David paused, then asked, "Are you sure?" "I want everyone to be there." He understood immediately. "All right, I'll prepare a plan for an on-site presentation, but you'll have to ensure the technical conditions are met." "I'll handle it." "Be careful," he added. "Ethan is not an easy man to deal with." I smiled faintly. "I know." Hanging up, I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Ethan wasn't easy to deal with. True, I had seen that clearly over the past 3 years. He was cold calculating and always one step ahead. But this time, I was no longer one step behind. That night, I went back to the apartment. Not because I missed it, but because I needed something. The apartment was the same as always, neat, cold, showing no signs of a family, only the evidence of a contract. I walked in, set down my bag, and did a walkthrough, looking at everything, the things I had barely touched in 3 years. Everything was pristine, as if this marriage had never existed. Ethan wasn't home. I knew he wouldn't be, and I didn't care. I went into the study, opened the safe, and took out a file, the original copy of our marriage contract. My signature, his signature, the official seal. I flipped through the pages, rereading it, not because I had forgotten, but because I wanted to remember every clause, every responsibility, every boundary, and every breach. I closed it, put it in my bag, and took one more thing, a small USB drive. On it were the original files of everything I had prepared. I looked at it for a moment, then tucked it away. Before leaving the apartment, I paused at the door. Without looking back, I whispered softly, "That's enough." I wasn't speaking to anyone but myself. The next day, the company entered the final stages of wedding preparations. The atmosphere was festive decorations, sound checks, lighting tests. Everything was coming together. I was there, an insider on the outside, observing, memorizing, controlling. Leo gave me a small device. "You'll need this." "Can you install it?" I asked. "Easy." "Is it stable?" "Guaranteed." I nodded. "Thanks." He grinned. "You're really going big this time, huh?" I looked at him. "Are you scared?" "No." Leo shook his head. "I think it's deserved." I said nothing and just gave his shoulder a light pat. The night before the wedding, I didn't do much. I didn't recheck documents, didn't make any more calls. I just sat alone in my room looking at the dress hanging ready, dark, simple, but enough. I thought back on the last 3 years every day, every task, every time I chose silence, every time I told myself, just get through these 3 years and it'll be over. But I was wrong. Enduring doesn't guarantee peace. Backing down doesn't guarantee safety. Some people, when they see you retreat, will only advance further. I stood up and touched the dress. The fabric was light but firm, just like me at that moment. No longer weak, no longer hesitant, only clear. Tomorrow I would go, not as a guest, not as an employee, but as the one who would end it all. The morning of the wedding arrived sooner than I expected. Not because time flew, but because when you've prepared for something long enough, the moment of confrontation is no longer frightening. It's like a door that's already open, waiting for you to walk through. And I walked through it in a strangely calm state. No nerves, no trembling, no hatred, just a silence that was almost absolute. I woke up early without an alarm. As soon as the morning light touched the curtains, my eyes were open. I lay still for a moment, listening to the steady, slow beat of my own heart. It wasn't racing. It was as if I had weathered enough storms to understand that some battles can be won quietly, with nothing more than certainty. I got out of bed, washed my face, brushed my hair. Every movement was slow, deliberate, unhurried, as if I were preparing for an ordinary day. But I knew today would be unlike any other day of my life. The dark dress was hanging neatly. I took it down, put it on, and adjusted the fabric. It wasn't elaborate or showy, but when I stood before the mirror, I saw one thing clearly. The woman in the reflection was not the Hannah of 3 years ago, and certainly not the Hannah of a week ago. She was someone calm enough to face anything strong enough not to be swayed and clear enough to know exactly what she was doing. I wore minimal makeup, just enough to look refreshed. I didn't need to outshine anyone. I just needed not to lose to myself. Before leaving, I checked my purse. The USB drive was there. The contract was there. Everything was in its place, just like my plan. I walked outside, hailed a cab, and settled into the back seat, watching the city come to life. People heading to work, traffic, the sound of horns. It was all so normal that no one would guess what a momentous day this was for me. The venue was a grand hotel in the city center. I arrived nearly an hour early, not because I was anxious, but because I needed one last look to feel the space where everything would unfold. Some things you can only grasp when you're standing in the place itself. The ballroom was already decorated, fresh flowers, glittering lights, a red carpet. It was all lavish and luxurious, fitting for Ethan's status, fitting for the perfect image he always wanted to project. I walked in. The staff at the entrance looked at me for a moment, then recognized me and nodded a greeting. They had likely been briefed. As I was part of the preparation team, I walked around the room observing the stage, the large screen, the sound and lighting positions. Every detail was exactly as I had seen in the plans. Leo was already there, standing near the tech booth. When he saw me, he gave a subtle nod. He didn't approach or speak, but his eyes told me everything I needed to know. It was all ready. I walked closer and whispered, "All set." Leo's voice was low. "Set. The timing is up to you." I nodded. No more needed to be said. Some things are more certain with fewer words. About half an hour later, the guests began to arrive, groups of familiar faces, partners, family members. Everyone was impeccably dressed, bearing smiles and congratulations. None of them knew what lay behind this perfect facade. I stood in a corner, not too conspicuous, but with a clear view of every face, every expression. The people I had marked on my list were all there just as I had predicted. A few recognized me and nodded. Some looked surprised, others had complex expressions, but no one asked any questions. They had probably heard the rumors, but no one was sure. Just then, Mia made her entrance. Dressed in a sparkling white gown, she moved through the hall like a star, the center of attention, a radiant smile, confident eyes. All eyes were on her. And in that moment, if you didn't know the truth, you would think she was the happiest bride in the world. She saw me, paused for a moment, and then walked directly towards me. "Hannah." Her voice was still sweet, but I could detect a hint of tension. "I didn't think you'd be here so early." I looked her up and down, then met her eyes. "It's your big day. I couldn't be late." She smiled, but it was no longer as natural as before. "Well, make sure you sit in the right spot. I saved a special seat just for you." "I'll remember," I replied softly. Mia lingered for another second, as if wanting to say more, but then turned away. Maybe because there were too many guests, or maybe because she was no longer certain she was in control. I watched her go, feeling nothing, no jealousy, no pain, just an observer. About 15 minutes later, Ethan appeared in a sharp black tuxedo. His face was still cold, still composed, the same man who 3 years ago I thought would never let any weakness show. He greeted guests, shook hands, made small talk. Everything was perfectly executed. But when his eyes met mine, I saw it clearly. He wasn't as calm as he appeared. It was just a flicker, but it was enough. He walked over. "You came." "I did." "Good." He looked at me longer than usual. "I hope you won't do anything to complicate things today." I smiled. "Don't worry." He said nothing more and turned away, but I knew my answer hadn't reassured him. On the contrary, it had started to worry him. The ceremony was about to begin. The guests were seated, the lights dimmed, and the music began. The MC walked onto the stage, his warm, clear voice guiding the event just as the script dictated. I sat in the seat Mia had arranged for me, front row center, a very special seat indeed. I looked up at the stage. The large screen lit up, and a video began to play images of Ethan and Mia, their first meeting, dinners, trips, moments of laughter, all edited together into a perfect love story. The room filled with applause and murmurs of admiration. No one knew. No one suspected a thing. I sat there, my hands resting lightly on my purse, my fingers touching a small remote. My heart was still beating steadily, not fast, not erratic, just waiting for the right moment. And I knew that moment was about to arrive. The video on the screen continued to play, each frame flowing smoothly into the next. The soft lighting and emotional music built to a crescendo, immersing the entire ballroom in an atmosphere of romance and admiration. There were sighs and whispers as all eyes fixed on the stage, following the perfectly crafted script, a script so flawless that if it weren't for what I held in my hand, even I might have been swept away believing this was a story worth celebrating. I sat perfectly straight, my hands resting on my purse, my fingers brushing against the small remote. I could feel my own heartbeat still steady, not speeding up, not slowing down. It was as if my entire being had been calibrated to a state of absolute equilibrium, where reason, not emotion, was in control. On stage, Mia leaned against Ethan, her smile radiant, her eyes slightly moist, whether from genuine emotion or the stage lights no one could tell. To the audience, she was the picture of a happy bride. As for Ethan, he stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his gaze fixed forward, calm and in control as always. But I knew that deep down he was waiting, watching. His eyes had flickered down to where I was sitting in the audience several times. The video reached its climax. A seaside proposal, fireworks, swelling music. The MC began his familiar lines about love, destiny, and choices. Every word was calculated to make the audience believe this was the beautiful culmination of a true romance. That was when I pressed the button. A very light press, but it was enough. For a split second, the screen froze just long enough for a few people in the audience to tilt their heads, assuming it was a technical glitch. Then the image changed. No more beach, no more flowers, no more perfect smiles. Instead, it was a hidden camera video. The angle was low, the lighting poor, but it was clear enough, a private room, a dinner table, Mia and Ethan. The sound came on. No more music, just voices. "How much longer are you going to keep that woman around?" Mia's voice no longer sweet, but sharp with irritation. The entire ballroom fell silent. I could hear every breath, every slight shift in a chair. On stage, Mia froze. So did Ethan. His voice echoed from the screen. "Until the contract is up." The room felt like it had been flash frozen. No one spoke. No one moved. The video continued. "I don't like seeing her in the office. Just ignore her. Or we could just get married early. Let her know her place." "Fine." Those last words dropped heavy and final, like a hammer blow shattering the entire facade that had just been constructed. I stood up, not quickly, not rushed. I walked forward step by step. The spotlights were still on the stage, but now many eyes had shifted to me. I walked to the side of the stage, took a microphone from a bewildered staff member, and stepped up. The lights weren't blinding. They were clarifying. I looked down at the audience, then at Ethan, then at Mia. My voice carried through the silent room, not loud, but perfectly clear. My apologies, everyone. I believe that last video might have been a bit of a surprise. No one laughed. No one reacted. Only a prolonged, tense silence. I held up my phone screen lit and faced the audience. On that note, I'd like to introduce myself. I paused for a beat. My name is Hannah. A very ordinary name, but then I continued, and I am Ethan Hayes' legal wife. The room erupted. Whispers, gasps, chairs scraping against the floor, all merging into a chaotic symphony. No one could maintain their composure now. On stage, Mia staggered back a step, her face ashen, her lips trembling. And Ethan? He stood motionless, but I saw his fists clench. His eyes were no longer cold, but filled with something close to panic. I didn't stop. I didn't give them a chance. Ethan and I were married 3 years ago. We have a legally binding marriage certificate. I held my phone higher. On the screen was a clear photo of the certificate, my name. His name, the official seal, undeniable. I'm not sure if everyone came here today to attend a wedding, I said, my gaze sweeping the room before returning to Ethan, or to witness an act of bigamy. The murmurs grew louder. Some people stood up, others turned to their neighbors, the atmosphere completely shattered. Mia shook her head, stumbling back again. Words tumbled out, but they were barely coherent. No, it's not like that. She looked at Ethan, desperate. I looked at her, my expression calm. Then what is it like? She couldn't answer. She just stared at Ethan. He took a step forward. That's enough. His voice was deep, but it lacked its usual steadiness. Get down from here. I looked at him. You want me to get down? This is not the place for you to make a scene. I let out a small laugh. A scene? I repeated, then shook my head. You think I'm making a scene? I raised the small remote slightly. Or am I just telling the truth? Ethan said nothing, but his eyes had changed completely. He was no longer the one in control. I turned back to the audience, my voice even. The video you just saw was only a small part. I paused, not for a breath, but to let them hear clearly. There's more. The tension in the room ratcheted up again like a string pulled to its breaking point. I didn't play anything else. I just held my position. It was enough. Enough for them to understand. Enough for Ethan to understand that I wasn't bluffing. I lowered my hand and looked directly at him. Do you want to continue? No one spoke. No one moved. The entire room waited for his answer, and for the first time I saw Ethan Hayes without an immediate response. For the first time in 3 years, he was no longer the one controlling the game. That moment stretched on not for long, but long enough for everyone in the room to feel the seismic shift. This was no longer a wedding ceremony. It had become a situation where everyone had to reevaluate where they stood, which side they were on. And Ethan understood this best of all, because the eyes of the most important people were fixed on him, not with congratulations, but with the expectation of a satisfactory explanation. Ethan stood there, his posture rigid, trying desperately to maintain his composure. But I could see the change in his breathing. He was trying to control every reaction because one slip and everything would spiral out of his hands completely. For a man like Ethan, that was the most unacceptable outcome. He turned to the older guests first, his voice lower, no longer as hard as before. Uncle, I apologize. Something unexpected has happened today. I will explain later. The moment he said misunderstanding, I saw a few people in the audience shake their heads slightly. What they had just witnessed could not be brushed aside so easily. I didn't interrupt. I let him talk. The more he talked, the more he exposed himself. The older man didn't sit down. His gaze remained fixed on Ethan. A misunderstanding with a marriage certificate. That question landed like a knife, severing any remaining semblance of calm. Ethan didn't answer immediately, and that hesitation was an answer in itself. It was then that Mia finally found her voice. It was high-pitched, trembling, and broken. I didn't know. I really didn't know. She looked around as if searching for an ally, then turned to Ethan. "Say something. Tell them it's not true. Tell them she's lying." I looked at her without pity, without anger. I just saw one thing clearly. She never imagined she would be in this position. She never imagined that the story in which she was the victor had a chapter she couldn't control. Ethan gently pushed Mia's hand away, not forcefully, but decisively. It was a small gesture, but it was enough to show that in this moment he no longer cared about saving her face. "Be quiet." Those two words were not loud, but they were ice cold. Mia froze, as if she couldn't believe what she had heard. She stumbled back, tears finally streaming down her face, but no one was paying attention to her anymore. The focus of the room had shifted. I watched it all unfold, not interfering. I needed to remain the most stable person in the room. Ethan turned back to me, his voice lower, no longer trying to sound tough. "What do you want, Hannah?" I took a very shallow breath, not for courage, but to maintain my rhythm. First, end the ceremony. Immediately. I spoke slowly, enunciating each word. Second, in front of everyone here, you will acknowledge our relationship. The room buzzed again, but this time it wasn't chaotic. It was focused. Third, everything that follows will be handled according to the law and the contract we signed. I didn't mention anything else, didn't hint at the deeper evidence I had, but I knew he understood, because the look in his eyes had shifted from anger to calculation. A few members of the board of directors began to whisper among themselves, small nods, serious expressions, all signals that Ethan could not ignore. His mother now stepped closer, her voice no longer completely calm, but still authoritative. "Ethan, make a decision." It wasn't advice, it was a demand. He stood there for another moment. A very short moment, but it was long enough for me to see it clearly. He was weighing his immediate reputation against the long-term consequences, the value of this ceremony against the entire system behind him. Finally, he exhaled a very slight breath, but I knew it was a sign. He stepped forward, took the microphone from my hand, not snatching it, just taking it, and turned to the audience. "My apologies to everyone." His voice came through the speakers, still deep and clear, but without its former confidence. "There has been an unforeseen incident today." He paused as if choosing his words. "What you have just witnessed is the truth. Hannah and I have a legal marital relationship." A new wave of murmurs rose, but this time it was confirmation, not shock. "I apologize for not handling my personal affairs clearly before organizing this event." He gave a slight bow, an act that before today no one would have imagined him doing. "Today's ceremony ends here." As soon as he finished speaking, the room broke not with a loud noise, but with movement. People stood up. They talked. They left. It was a wave that spread quickly. Mia stood there as if she'd been abandoned. No one looked at her. No one cared anymore. Her magnificent wedding dress suddenly looked out of place in the dissolving ballroom. I stood still watching Ethan. No victory, no defeat, just the end of a chapter I had lived for too long. He looked at me, his eyes complex, but he said nothing. And I said nothing either, because everything that needed to be said had already been said. After Ethan called off the ceremony, the ballroom descended into a controlled chaos. The neat rows of chairs became disordered as people stood up, some walking briskly towards the exit, others turning back to look each with their own questions, but all sharing one certainty. The perfect image they had been invited to celebrate was a lie. And in that chaos, I found everything becoming clearer than ever, like a veil being torn away to reveal the truth behind it. I didn't leave right away. I stayed not to gloat, but to finish what I had started. I knew that if I left now, it would just be a canceled wedding, a scandal, a story for people to gossip about. But if I stayed a little longer, I could turn it into a definitive end, leaving no room for anyone to twist the narrative. Ethan had put down the microphone and was standing in place, surrounded by different looks. Disappointment, anger, and a simple reevaluation of the man they thought they knew. Mia was still there, her hands clutching her dress, her eyes red, but not crying out loud, as if she hadn't yet processed what had just happened, unable to accept that everything she thought she was about to have had vanished in minutes. I stepped down from the stage and walked forward. Not quickly, not slowly. Each step firm, just as I had walked for the past 3 years. The only difference was that this time I wasn't looking down. I walked straight past the staring eyes without avoidance, without explanation. A few people called my name, but I didn't stop. Those words no longer mattered. What mattered was that I had said enough. As I neared the exit, Ethan's mother called out, "Hannah!" Her voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to make me stop. Not because I was still under her control, but because I wanted to hear her out this time, not as a daughter-in-law, but as an equal. I turned to face her. She came a little closer, her gaze no longer sharp, but heavy with a certain weariness. Was it worth it? The question wasn't an accusation, nor was it truly concern. It felt more like an admission that things had spun out of her control. I looked at her for a long moment before answering. 3 years ago, I also thought it wasn't worth it. I paused. But if I hadn't done this today, it would have been even less worth it later. She fell silent, saying nothing more, just letting out a soft sigh like someone who had just realized there was nothing more she could do. I gave her a polite, respectful nod and turned to leave. Stepping out of the ballroom, the air outside felt different. The sun was still shining, cars were still moving, people were still walking. No one knew a life-altering event had just taken place inside. And that normality made me feel the change within myself even more acutely. I was no longer weighed down, no longer held back. It was a feeling of lightness, as if I had just shed a heavy cloak I had worn for too long. My phone rang. It was my lawyer, David. "I was monitoring," he said. "I saw." "Good," was his concise reply. "Shall we proceed with the next step immediately?" I looked up at the sky. The light was bright, but I didn't flinch. "Proceed. The filing will be submitted today. I'll need your signature. This afternoon, I'll be there." After hanging up, I stood there for another moment, just feeling this. Not a moment of victory, but a moment of closure, the end of a chapter of my life that I had spent in forbearance within limits set by others. That afternoon, I went to David's office. No new appointments, no further preparations needed. Everything was ready. David handed me a thick, neatly organized file. "I've compiled everything from the breach of the prenuptial agreement to the other related issues." I took it, opened it, and flipped through the pages, not to check, but to see everything laid out in its proper legal place. "You just need to sign," David said. I picked up the pen and, without hesitation, signed my name. A clear, steady stroke. I put the pen down and looked at him. "Thank you." David nodded. "You did the hardest part yourself." I gave a small smile. "No, the hardest part was 3 years ago." He didn't ask for more details, just closed the file. "After today, everything will follow procedure." "I know." I stood up ready to leave, but David stopped me. "Hannah." I turned back. "Any regrets?" The question made me pause for a second, just long enough to ask myself one last time. I shook my head. No. And this time I was certain. I walked out of the law office. The day had softened. The sun was no longer harsh, and a light breeze was blowing. Everything was as normal as any other day, but I knew that from this day forward, my life had turned a new page. I was no longer the person standing in the background, no longer defined by my connection to someone else. I was just me, and that was enough. The aftermath was quicker than I thought. Not because things were rushed, but because once a truth is exposed so completely, everything that follows naturally falls into an orbit that no one can pull it back from. I just had to stay in my position and do what I had started, and the rest would find its own conclusion. News of the canceled wedding spread almost instantly. No official press was needed. The guests themselves were enough. The story was embellished, but the core remained unchanged. A wedding stopped mid-ceremony, a wife appearing a video, a truth revealed. It was enough to become the story the entire company and its related circles couldn't ignore. The next morning, when I returned to the office to finalize my resignation, the atmosphere was completely different. The cheerful buzz was gone, as were the furtive, judgmental glances. Instead, people looked at me directly. Some nodded, some looked away, some seemed to want to say something but held back. There was a new sense of caution. After what had happened, they understood I was no longer someone they could freely judge. I walked through the office, my steps even and steady as always, but this time each step felt different. I was no longer walking through a space I had to adapt to, but one I was about to leave. It felt lighter, clearer. Leo was waiting at my desk. When he saw me, he stood up, his eyes a mixture of curiosity and awe. "Hannah." I nodded. "Leo." He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "I was watching from the booth yesterday. I got goosebumps." I smiled faintly. "You played your part well." He scratched his head and grinned. "I just provided support. You were the main act." I didn't say more. I knew everyone had played their part, and without any one link, the chain would have been broken. "Where will you go now?" he asked. "Take some time off first, then figure it out." I looked out the window. "I don't know yet, but it definitely won't be like before." He nodded, not pressing, but his eyes lit up as if he believed I wouldn't stop here. I packed my things. There wasn't much, a few personal documents, some small items. Everything fit into one box. 3 years of work reduced to this, but I felt no regret. What I was taking with me wasn't objects, but experience lessons. And the change within myself. As I was about to leave, Ethan's assistant approached. "Hannah, Mr. Hayes would like to see you." I looked at her, then nodded. Okay. No surprise, no avoidance. I went up to the top floor to the office, where every time I entered, before I had to remind myself to be careful, to be proper, to keep my distance. But this time, I walked in with a completely different mindset. Ethan was standing by the window just like before, but this time he no longer commanded the space. He seemed like a man trying to hold on to what little was left. He turned as I entered. "Sit." I sat waiting for him to speak. He looked at me for a long time before finally saying, "You were very thorough." His voice was no longer cold, but subdued. "I did what I had to do," I replied. He gave a small, humorless laugh. "I underestimated you." I didn't argue. It was the truth. "Regarding the divorce, my lawyer will be in touch with yours," he continued. "I won't make it difficult with the assets." I looked at him, and for the first time through all of this, I saw the exhaustion in his eyes. It wasn't about losing money. It was about losing control, the one thing that mattered more to him than anything. "I don't need you to make it easy or difficult," I said. "I just need what is right." He was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough." A quiet moment passed between us, not awkward, but like two people who had said everything there was to say, with nothing left to argue about. Before I stood up to leave, he said my name, "Hannah." I turned back. If I had handled things differently from the start, would things be different? The question wasn't about going back. It was an acknowledgement of a reality he had just come to realize. I looked at him straight on. "Yes," I answered, "but you didn't." I turned and walked out of that room. I didn't feel lighter or heavier. I just felt clearer. Clear that some things don't bring peace because they're over, but because you've understood them, accepted them, and moved past them. That evening I went home, not to the apartment, but to my parents' house, a place I hadn't stayed for long in years due to work distance and 100 other reasons. But when I walked in, the familiar smell, my mother's voice calling my name, the look in my father's eyes, it all made me realize something very simple. Some places belong to you without you ever having to try. My mother looked at me, didn't ask many questions, just took my hand. "It's good you're home." I nodded. My father sat there, watched me for a moment, and said, "You did the right thing." Just 4 words, but they were enough. I sat down between them, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not because everything was over, but because I knew from now on I no longer had to live by rules set by others. That night I slept deeply. No dreams, no startling awake, no half-finished thoughts, because for the first time in a long time there was nothing left to hold on to. The days that followed were quieter than I'd imagined. There were no more major upheavals, no dramatic confrontations or heated exchanges. Everything proceeded according to its own logic, slowly but surely, like a tide receding to reveal what was always meant to be seen. All I had to do was continue on my own path without looking back, without needing to prove anything more. The divorce was finalized faster than expected, not because Ethan was being cooperative, but because he understood that dragging it out would only allow more damaging information to spread. What happened at the ceremony was enough to force him to choose the path of least resistance. This time he wasn't the one setting the terms, he was the one accepting them. I saw him one last time at the law office, not to argue or reminisce, but to complete the final paperwork. We sat across from each other, just as we had on this day we signed the contract 3 years prior. The only difference was that now there was no initial caution, no unknowns, just two people who had walked a long road together and understood each other better than anyone. Ethan had lost weight. His face no longer held its familiar sharp coolness, but seemed more subdued. His eyes no longer looked at me as a business partner, but as someone who had lost something he once thought was unimportant. The lawyers read the terms division of assets, responsibilities, entitlements. Everything was clearly written. There were no disputes, no further edits. The time for disputes was over. What remained was mere procedure. When it was time to sign, I picked up the pen and looked down at the paper, not out of hesitation, but to fully absorb the moment. A moment I never thought I would reach this way 3 years ago, but a way I did not regret. I signed my name with a decisive stroke and put the pen down. Ethan signed as well, quietly, without a word. As the lawyers collected the documents, he looked at me, his gaze for once free of calculation. "Will you be okay?" The question surprised me, not because of what he asked, but because he was the one asking. I looked at him. I was okay before I signed. He nodded, saying nothing more. Perhaps he understood, or perhaps there was nothing left to say. We stood up at the same time. No handshake, no formal goodbye, like strangers, just a slight nod that was enough to close the chapter. Stepping out of the law office, the sky was overcast. Not glaringly sunny, not raining, a pleasant kind of day. I stopped for a moment and took a deep breath, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to remember this feeling, the feeling of personally unshackling myself from bonds that no longer belonged to me. In the following weeks, I didn't rush into anything big. I spent more time at home, going to the market with my mom, cooking, drinking tea with my dad, listening to his old stories. These seemingly ordinary things settled my soul, because after everything, it's the simple things that hold you together when all else changes. One afternoon, as I was sitting with my dad in the yard, I received a text from an unknown number. It was just one line, "You won." No name was needed. I knew who it was. I looked at the message for a moment, then turned off the screen. I didn't reply, didn't give it another thought, because for me this was never about winning or losing. If it was a victory, it was a victory over my former self, the person who once believed that silence was the only way to keep the peace. A few weeks later, an old colleague reached out with a partnership offer. He had worked with me on a project before and knew my work ethic. He proposed I join a prospective new venture, not as large as my old company, but enough for me to start over on my own terms. I didn't accept immediately. I took my time to read, think, and discuss. I was no longer in a rush. I understood that this choice wasn't just about a job. It was about how I wanted to live. In the end, I agreed. Not because the project was perfect, but because I knew I could lead it, be responsible for it. And most importantly, I wouldn't have to rely on anyone else to stand on my own 2 feet. On my first day at the new workplace, there was no welcome party, no grand title, just a simple desk, a small team, and a new beginning. But I felt light, because this time I was here because of my own abilities, not because of some other agreement. A few months later, Leo joined me. He said simply, "I feel safer working with you." I smiled, saying nothing, but my heart felt warm. Some relationships don't need many words, just enough trust. Occasionally I would hear news about Ethan. He no longer held his previous position. His power was curtailed and he had to share decision-making with the board. He no longer had absolute control. As for Mia, She had disappeared long ago. No one knew where she went. Their story became a cautionary tale people told about the consequences of poor choices. I heard it and moved on. It didn't make me happy or sad. It no longer concerned me. One morning, as I stood before the mirror, getting ready for work, I looked at myself not to check my appearance, but to see who was standing there. And I realized I no longer saw the shadow of the woman who had accepted standing in the background, who was afraid of making waves, who thought endurance was the only way. The person in the mirror was me, but a different version, clearer, stronger, and freer. I smiled a small, genuine smile, then turned, picked up my bag, and walked out the door. The morning sun cast its light on the road ahead. It wasn't dazzling, but it was bright enough for me to see my own path, and this time I didn't need anyone to lead the way. I knew where I was going. Hannah's story doesn't end with a loud bang, but with a profound quiet, the quiet of a person who has walked through enough pain to understand that some losses are not losses at all, but liberation. 3 years, a loveless marriage, a trade-off for family and responsibility, Hannah had chosen to endure, to be silent, to stand in the background. She believed that once the contract expired, everything would end naturally with no further hurt. But life does not operate on simple forbearance. Some people, when they see you retreat, will only advance further. When you don't speak up, they will assume you have no right to. What makes this story so compelling is not the dramatic reveal at the wedding, but Hannah's journey of transformation, from a person who accepted compromise to one who dared to stand tall to speak the truth and to take ownership of her own life. She didn't lash out in anger or seek revenge for her pain. She chose a clear, sober path to reclaim what was hers through preparation, reason, and self-respect. Ethan lost not just a marriage, but his status and the control he thought he would always possess. Mia lost not just a wedding, but the illusion of a victory built on a flawed foundation. And Hannah, she didn't win against anyone. She simply stopped losing to herself. Perhaps the most precious part of this story is the moment Hannah returns home, sits with her parents, listens to their simple stories, and feels a peace she had long overlooked. Because after all is said and done, reputation, money, and glamorous connections will fade. Only the places that are truly home can hold you. The story ends there, but its echo remains a gentle reminder that in life, sometimes the most important thing isn't whether you can keep everything, but whether you can keep yourself. If you ever find yourself in a situation like Hannah's, forced to choose between silence and speaking up, between enduring and walking away, remember this. Patience is a virtue, only when it's placed in the right context. If it causes you to lose yourself, then it's time to stand up, because no one has the right to determine your worth but you. And when you dare to walk on your own 2 feet, the path ahead, no matter how difficult, will be the one most worth taking.